27th of July. It's 2023. Hello, everybody. I'm going to be your host tonight, Dana Durnford. Which takes us a minute or two to getting up to bashing speed. There's always bashing speed around here. When it comes to nuclear, the world will agree at some point that we were right. And that point is coming in our lifetime too. We got lots of news to get kind of through. The industry is really something, isn't it? I'll just take you backwards for a second. You can call in at 709-589-4406. And so you can challenge my narrative. I put the number here every night, and nuclear scientists can say, oh, Dana, you actually made a mistake. That'd be great. Local nuclear experts dismiss Fukushima water concerns. So the new story is 2.2 grams is what's going to get out, but it's going to take 30 years. It's just tritium, so no need to worry. Every plant releases tritium because they love you so much. We got a poll. South Korea, Taiwan, China, Japan, and the disgusting International Atomic Energy Agency evil by saying only 2.2 grams. 2.2 grams of tritium got out of Fukushima nuclear meltdowns, but don't worry your pretty little heads because it's in tanks. So if you look at the building up there, was around 10 million pounds in it, because the fuel pools were stuffed with decades of reactor cores. The buildings were originally 150 feet wide, 190 feet tall. And fuel pools are at the top of the buildings. There's two of them. They're hemorrhaging radiation into the environment because that fuel is still splitting the atoms. But not to worry, the official story in 2013 was this one right here. So when they come out and say that it's going to be 2.2 grams, that's all they got out of there, it's not a big stretch when you consider the lies they've already told. The fuel pools actually covered the entire planet. And when you look at the size of this is taller than the stump of reactor 3 and 4 stacked on each other. And that is the lower part of, the top part right there is that piece right there, which is taller than that. And ultimately it's 190 feet tall. So what the demonic little demons done was they built this contraption off site, laid it in there, and you can see how high the building actually is. It's a real good picture. And so you can see where it ultimately comes down to. And remember, this is the remains of whatever you want to call that. Bring that to get my face out of the way. So what you should do to debunk me is take screen capture this without me. And then ask him to explain where the fuel pool to the right is 2 at the top of that building. And then also take a screen capture of that so you can understand how big visually it is. And then show him all these people pretending, there's a lot more than that, pretending they're in, and they've done the same thing for Reactor 3, by the way, pretending they're in the fuel pools that don't exist. And if you think there's only 2.2 grams that got edited here, then I got another one for you. Is explain this to me. There was In 2019, there was 105,000 sites where they were storing 1-ton bags radiation because they have over 30 million of the 1-ton bags. Now we're being conservative. We're being conservative because we're nice like that of these 1-ton bags. But mainstream media, we've heard them say there's 60 million.
There's about 60 million tons of contaminated soil that's being stored, planned to be stored, outside the Fukushima Daiichi perimeter fence.
So when they say 2.2 grams is all it's going to get out of the buildings, and they're pretending they're in the buildings, this is a fair stretch to think that they're lying to you. And this year, the International Atomic Energy Agency said about those millions and millions and millions of 1-ton bags that the public trust is the key to the projects using the radioactive soil in projects. Now, they're growing food right alongside the 1-ton bags. So you're completely into the twilight zone, if you made it this far in the video. And by the way, the International Atomic Energy is not a regulator and not in a position to judge or approve Japan's soil. They got the last say. And that the South Korean current president actually claimed a couple of years ago there was no leaks and that the reactors didn't collapse, despite the fact that the reactors collapsed. Oh, and if you find any fish in the Atlantic Ocean, it's because they got out of the local port. Not because the radiation has covered the entire planet. No, not because you got radiation all over the entire planet, 865,000 extra cancers. No, nothing got out, Dana, only 2.2 grams. Okay, can we just let it go at that? There we go. There we go. Just in case it forgets later. I do got a video from today coming up of the drive shaft. We'll have the new one on Wednesday. So we'll be back in business. The boat is working. It was the ground wire. Remember, I done a video earlier where I had done the power wire to the motor, but you didn't see me do the ground wire, did you? That caught up to me. So that's great. We got that resolved. And then the truck will be back in full business on Wednesday. We'll be up and running full steam after Wednesday. Some pictures and a little video of the madness. I got crushed by the truck today when I took the shaft off. Oops. I'll get over it in a couple of days anyway. Damage reported after tornado-warned storm hits southern Ontario where they got nuclear power plants. We're getting tornadoes here in Canada where we got the nuclear power plants. Yay. Everything comes down to St. Lawrence to where I'm to on top of that. Japan briefs Hong Kong media on Fukushima. That was nice of them. Isn't that nice of them? Yeah, no, don't listen to Durnford talking about reactors. Traitor. Coward. You scammer. Don't listen to Durnford. The fake pictures. He photoshopped every one of them. He's a troublemaker, that one. That Durnford. All I do is show you the picture and ask you to get your shit together and start fighting back. Is that a crime? Japan, apparently so. Japan on Wednesday briefed journalists in Hong Kong. Stop saying it's nuclear. I can hear it now. So much arrogance. Can you imagine the shit pants they sent in there to do it? The release, which they haven't stopped releasing it. Does anybody show them pictures of the reactors, I wonder? Release of the treated. No mercy, man. This is like almost 4 weeks straight of this. Radioactive. What would he put radioactive there? That's a switch. Water from the crippled. I hate that word so much. The buildings they're gone. There's nothing left, only a stump. If you had a 19-story building, you came home and that's what you saw. Do you call it your building or do you call it a stump? Come on, stop denying. Into the sea, which they have starting, but they haven't stopped for 12 years. You can't contain it. People with Hong Kong media outlet cover a briefing. People. Well, that's good. I'm glad they didn't call them journalists, because that's what got me upset too. People. Well, it's better than being called citizen, I suppose. Hello, slaves. The treated water meets the international safety standards. And I just showed you the International Atomic Energy Agency is not a regulator. They don't have any authority. Wake up, planet. Water meets international safety standards. Have an eligible. There is no international safety standard. You're dumping it into the ocean, the lifeblood of the planet, you piece of shit. And will have an eligible radiological impact on both. Like it's. They're actually insane. And the best way to understand it is they're growing food in the nuclear wasteland within eyesight of the reactors, right alongside of 1-ton bags, millions of them radiation, and they're surrounded by prefectures that were banned, 14 of them that were banned by 55 countries for a decade. It should ban everything in Japan, unfortunately, because they screwed up. Japanese Consul-General of Hong Kong, Okada, refrained from answering a question on whether the territory's move to tighten restrictions was political. We see this straw man argument constantly. You got no signs, scammer. Yeah, they're so used to being monsters. Their parents were monsters, and their parents were monsters for the nuclear industry, and their parents were monsters for the nuclear industry, and their great-great-great-grandpappy was a monster for 40 years for the nuclear disease factories. But he said it was an extremely disappointing decision, added there were no scientific ground. There was no scientific ground. So South Korea is in crisis. Japan has been doing this for 12 years, but there's been a real push now for almost 4 weeks. We're covering everything we can find. We're scouring the net all day, every day, all night, every night, and we're tallying up and telling the story each day. And we're catching the new breaking news story. The official story now is only 2.2 grams got out. Such a coward story, isn't it? I can't wait to find out who came up with that story. I'm assuming it's the United Nations, by the way, IAEA per se. There was no scientific ground. So there's so many ways, right, to challenge that particular narrative, and that's the problem. Hang on. Because it's so important that you challenge each and every single false assertion that they because it keeps showing up over and over and over to try to turn that into the public consciousness, right? And they're pretty good. They're pretty good at it. And so I know it doesn't matter. I know waste of time and everything else. Nobody's going to call him on it. So I feel an obligation to call him on it. Whether it makes any difference or not, tag him and call him on it. And don't tolerate. That way you don't tolerate. The problem is this happens all day, every day. These gobblish, hideous, soulless creeps. There we go. Alrighty. Let's get it on. So, this is how heartless. Besides growing food in a nuclear wasteland right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation, murdering everybody, they left an absurd amount of people in a nuclear wasteland. The third row, this row right here from your left, is per square meter. So where you stood up and spin around, basically that area. Population is the second row, and the name of the community is the first row. Now, this is United Nations, unclear that done this one. What's going on here? Oh, I went over there instead of. Average disposition density 137 cesium in the soil. So each of these you should be evacuating big time. Fukushima City, over 300,000 people. It's just cruel to leave them there. Every house there is entitled to be decommissioned, but nobody got hurt by radiation. And on the 10th anniversary, UN came out all day everywhere saying there was no adverse health effects from Fukushima. But we definitely got a different tally of that. And so you can see the communities over there, how many people's in the community, and the becquerels of just cesium. Should multiply it by 600 to get the real numbers. Because there's gammas and alphas and betas, neutrons, and there's also X-rays when all this is. No health effects. But you left everybody in a nuclear wasteland. These are huge numbers we're talking about, and they're only acknowledged in just the cesium-137. And just to be monsters, for the 10th anniversary, they said found no adverse health effects. We don't know. That was the anniversary video. We came out and challenged every one of them, and there was just endless amount of them that showed up. But all major media, too, come out and stabbed the planet in the back. So all these different communities, there's the populations. These are people that's an actual nuclear wasteland. And UN standards, by the way. And yet, here's UN saying there's no adverse health effects. Despite that, their standard says this is a nuclear wasteland. Sadistic demons. And the list goes on and on. So for them to claim that there's no scientific proof, by the way, when I look at the dog studies, by the way, curium is the biggest byproduct of the radiative fuel rods. Not cesium. Curium is a nasty. It's a very nasty isotope. What am I doing here? Yeah, there we go. Or go this way. So when you look at now, dogs' kidneys are 50% more effective at excreting radiation than a human's. So humans are 50 times more vulnerable than a dog is. There we go. So there was 144 beagle dogs and puppies. They were inhaled one of two sizes of plutonium. And tumors, deaths from radiation occurred by 1.5 to 5.4 years after exposures from tumors. They basically all had at least 3 different types of tumors. Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occurred beginning about 3 years. Bone tumors found in 93 of the 144 dogs were the most common cause of death. Lung tumors in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. And liver tumors found in 20 dogs were the cause of death in only 2 dogs, but occurred later than the tumors in the bones and the lungs. Tumors in these 3 organs often occurred in the same animal and were competing causes of death. And the finding in the dogs suggests similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed. Well, there's no such thing as an accident. It's nuclear, right? These are not created by the sun. These elements are man-made. We create them, and we call them anthropogenic isotopes because they're man-made. They're very specific. And there's nothing on the planet has a tolerance for that type of isotope because it's not natural. So your body has a natural tolerance of all natural elements of stardust because you're made of stardust, right? Now the dogs are 50 times more effective of filtering it out in their kidneys than humans are. So you're 50 times more vulnerable than the dogs. But curium, which is the same in the way it acts as plutonium, are the major byproduct of the radiated nuclear fuel. This is the same Loveless Respiratory Research Institute and Raymond Gilmedy in particular. We went through 99 of his studies because I'm a prick sometimes. And we gleaned all kinds of useful information out of his rotten, hideous soul. But the curium isotopes need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. And I can't find that on my Geiger counters, by the way. But you know it's there because it's the biggest byproduct. If you find any isotope, then curium has to be there because it has such a long life. And because it's man-made, it keeps its power, whereas natural is not as powerful. The longer half-lives it has, they have 10 half-lives. But man-made stuff retains its energy the entire time, right? This is what he used it for spacecrafts and stuff like this. Adding that there was no scientific, my group, the nuclearproctologist.org, is a think tank, and we are anti-nuclear in space, and because it's not natural. And that there was no scientific grounds for this measure. I disproved that just now. Okada said the press briefing was held to eliminate any misunderstanding or concerns about treated. A journalist's job is just to stab you in the back. And pledged that the Japs will continue providing sincere, thorough, science-based information. Whoever wrote that, just have to get this shit kicked out of them. To claim that never happened, you piece of shit. You disgusting piece of shit. Providing sincere, thorough, science-based information, except for, science and the information. This is the ghost of Reactor 3. This is a big problem. A female reporter says she sees a big political factor in the issue. A female reporter? Notice how they didn't call them a journalist? They don't exist anymore. There's a few, I guess, out there, but they're too busy with sports, I guess. Hong Kong tightens inspection. So Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan, from what we got, it's undeniable, it's unassailable that they're working together. And their version of Fukushima is 2.2 grams got it, but don't worry, it's in 1,000 tanks. And it's only tritium, so Go eat your fish, shut your friggin' mouth. 80% of the population of South Korea is gone insane with rage against the industry, and they want it to go away. And so they've been at this for about 4 weeks. They're coming out with law after, oh, we're going to take samples. Well, how come you haven't taken samples for the last 12 years? And you haven't found nothing, which is this administration. See, the administration, despite whatever happened during the previous administration, the next administration will just pretend it never happened. It's absurd. It's the stupidest thing imaginable. It's the most dangerous route you can take. Hong Kong tightens inspections on vegetable imports. That cracks me up. Hey, Hong Kong, you morons. But they're playing into the games. Eh? Well, first off, why would you eat anything from Japan when they're growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation, putting it up in the media and justifying it? Saying the farmers got to make a living, even if it is murdering everybody in every supermarket they can get their diddly stupid food into. Hong Kong is strengthening inspections of vegetable imports from Japan. Expanding the scope of so this is about pushing the narrative of tritium. This is about saying what might happen instead of what's been happening for 12 years straight. And then as soon as you see the word treated, it's pointless to read the story. But because what we're doing basically, like, the only way you can approach it is you got to document everything. And that freaks them out. And then you end up seeing all these patterns. And it's really something to say only 2.2 grams. That's what they're trying to, and they probably will too, but they're trying to convince the population, which is really upset with them, but doesn't understand the big picture. I can imagine the government can't wait for the day when they just lock everybody in their homes and don't got to deal with you anymore. Tokyo said he tried that a couple of years ago. It was called a scamdemic, right? Tokyo said it would begin to release sometime this summer and receive backing from the International Atomic Energy Agency for the plan earlier this month. Japan's top diplomat in Hong Kong accused the city officials of failing to show scientific proof behind. So imagine a journalist doesn't go looking for the proof. I mean, food was banned by 55 countries for a decade. Not Canada, of course. Canada's not actually a country, see? Canada surrendered after 93 days. So we surrender. So Japan's like, thank goodness we couldn't ship it anywhere. Now we can ship it all the deadly food to Canada. Canada said, it's okay, we'll bring in lots of immigrants too. So when all the Canadians are sick, we'll start shipping in the immigrants and we'll slack off on the Japanese food and they'll take over the country. Everybody else will die off. And then we can have a nuclear in every community because these people don't understand the big picture. Right, to come out of a depressed area or a violent area and they just want a job and they're just trying to make it through the world. But there is no world to make it through if we don't stop nuclear. Nuclear has crossed the line, officially crossed the line, period. Claiming 2.2 grams. It's mind-boggling how you get that evil. Consul-General Okada and a nuclear researcher, shift for lips, met Hong Kong press to discuss the International Atomic Energy Agency's findings, but by the way, they're not a regulatory agency. They don't have any authority, and they don't get the final say, or the first say, or the last say. And clean up safety fears. So far, we have not received a scientific, rational, or grounds for this measure in the Hong Kong row. Oh, let me fix that for you. All the world needs to see is this one little short video. That's it. If you screen capture this and make it viral for the next year, you win.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be Reactor Building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
So if you screen capture that little short video and you open up social media and just email or whatever and send it out to every engineering in your country. When you're bored, email it out to 10 or 20. Next time you're bored, email it out to another 10 or 20. Just keep doing that every day for the rest of your life and encourage them to do the same thing in the email, and we win in no time flat. Because if that goes viral, the world is going to want their heads. Right? The world is going to... The world is going to be a lot angrier than Dana used to be. Oh, it's coming. It's definitely coming. I look forward to the day the one-armed bandit got near one. Japan's top diplomat in Hong Kong has accused the local authorities of failing to provide scientific data to prove the country's seafood imports will present a health risk to the consumer.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to
be a power plant that was
Reactor 4.
Radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
Somebody said, that's amazing. 4 hours in front of a green screen and you got a chest x-ray. Wow. There's 70 plants in the United States exactly like Fukushima, identical twins. 72 is it, I think. Japan's top diplomat in Hong Kong has accused the local authorities of failing to provide any scientific proof. Treated. Every time I heard the word treated, like I feel like I should go show you the story of what's really going on. You can't do that because you end up doing it 100 times in a row, right? Wicked bastards. Look, I almost typed treated in that time. You know your head is screwed when you start repeating the lies yourself, right? Oh my. So this is straightforward. I got it to the shortest version I can get it to. So 2014 in April, 3 years, 1 month later, the ELP system didn't work. 6 months later, in 2014, the Areva system admitted that it didn't work. In 2013, it's the last time we heard tell of the Siri. 2013 was the last time we heard of the Siri system. But in 2013, they acknowledged they were dumping it basically into the ocean. And right, the ice wall didn't work. When you've done the radiation readings around 20-mile radius, it was 3 million becquerels a square meter. But no, only 2.2 grams got out, and it's all in the 1,000 tanks. And TEPCO's ice wall is not meeting expectations. It failed to deliver on a fence to stop contamination, radiation, because that doesn't work that way. And why would you build an ice wall rather than a real wall? TEPCO says the groundwater bypass didn't work, the Areva system didn't, or the ELP system didn't work, the Areva system didn't work. Nothing worked. Everything's under control. South Korea is adopting the strictest. Now, this is total propaganda, by the way. South Korea is disgusting. The current administration is so pro-nuclear. When he was elected president, the next morning, had a press conference in the gates of a nuclear power plant. This is going to be a pro-nuclear administration. He's the same guy 2 years ago when he was a prosecutor saying there was no collapse at Fukushima. And he's pro-nuclear. Guess why he got elected? The strictest methods of detecting, I like it, like it's a good propaganda. You give them credit for being real wicked monsters. Not a single trace of hazardous material will be allowed. Not a single trace. The government once again reiterated that the people need not worry about the safety of the seafood on our tables. Park explained that the Food and the Drug Authority meticulously checked the origin documents of all the seafood imported from overseas, including those from Fukushima. South Korea's banned all seafood imports from 8 prefectures. And they never done that until 2013. Idiots. Once the products are deemed, well, they had to ban it because everybody was getting cancer. Once the products were deemed suitable for imports, authorities conducted detailed tests. Yeah, bring it in. Even a small amount of radiation detected will result in an immediate ban on the product. This is this lot right here. We've covered them a few days ago. These are sadistic government demons. The government has conducted measurements on 55,000 cases of seafood at the production levels this year, and all of them showed no trace of radiation. Not even nuclear bomb testing follow traces, really. I find that pretty convenient because the buildings are actually gone, and you haven't acknowledged it a single time. Well, you have, but not this administration. Even France, scumbag France, done a 30-day model, and it ain't pretty. It covers the whole planet in the first 20 days, and it just keeps getting thicker every day forever. It never goes away. It's pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. If you look at all your typhoons and cyclones and hurricanes that are never seen before type stories, 200 mile plus hour winds coming ashore, in places that does not have infrastructure for that. Let's keep going. South Korea fishermen stage a rally against Japan's planned release of nuclear-contaminated wastewater. Nuclear-contaminated. Not nuclear meltdown. I'll show you a picture or two. No, well, why do that? Why don't you stick that picture up? That'll get their confidence back. So they're doing everything they can to poison everybody in Asia. They're gotten to hell with it, because I guess they figure it doesn't matter after a few years, right? Everybody will be sick. There's 1,800 diseases will show up. South Korea fishermen staged a maritime rally in the southern coastal cities on Wednesday, protest against Japan's planned release of the nuclear-contaminated. This is like the tanks are empty. The Riva system didn't work. The Alps systems didn't work. The Siri system didn't work. The ice wall didn't work. The fence didn't work. Because it's the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language, that are doing it. There's not academics and scientists. There's no journalists. Crippled. Just when you hear crippled, they're not being realistic. No pictures. Why not show us a scattered picture yet? Not like you don't have access to them like I do. Oh, Dana, you're the only guy got any access. Over 100 fishing boats set out from the port of the country on Wednesday afternoon, plowing their way through the glittering blue waves with banners attached on the sides that read, "Oppose Fukushima nuclear-contaminated wastewater discharge into the ocean." Ocean's not a dumping ground for the nuclear contaminated, and you're using the wastewater. You can't even have a conversation with somebody when you do that. This is not rocket science, by the way. That's the beauty of it. So when a pro-nuclear comes through waiting for a Freudian slip to beat me up with, I get them. They're brainwashed. And so the industry hides me away. If a student wants to go to university, he starts watching my videos and says, "Wait, now it's like a banana." And he's like, "Wait a second, actually, maybe it's not." Do you see anything, dear, you would take home to reuse in your shed? Or tree house or anything? The reactor, now the reactor was over half full. They say the reactor had no fuel, which that they were just changing the fuel. They weren't changing all the fuel. And the fuel pools had 40 years of reactor cores. And not only that, the problem was you don't have a repository, so they're stuffed. And we cover all of this. Like, can't have an educational program without being 100% honest. That's the only way it's going to work. And then, even if we make a Freudian slip which I'm very careful about, but it's going to happen. I usually catch it anyway, right? Within the next minute or something. It's pretty rare because the industry will chop it out and stick it in a folder and wait to get a list up and say, "See, Dana don't know what he's talking about." The long line of boats circle around in southern waters, and 12 of them sail towards 2 vessels. And from the 2 vessels, 120 boxes with a mark symbolizing nuclear pollutants were thrown into the sea to represent Japan's radioactive wastewater discharge. Here, well done. Well done. The media, instead of the media saying, "Well, we got models, by the way, this one's from Germany." The problem was, that was over 6 years, but the airborne covered the planet in 19.5 days. See, gas, oil, and coal doesn't pulse energy every second for millions of years or even for once. Radiation, each isotope, each atom that's falling, it never goes away. You can't destroy it and forest fires, just liberate it back into the environment. It's pulsing energy at the speed of light in every direction, every second. And by proxy, then nothing can deal with it. Just think about, try to invent something that goes almost the speed of light every second. And there's only one thing that does it. This is why we have terrorist laws, because this stuff, it's effect. And so when it's pulsing, they hit each other, like gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas. They don't mingle. This is what makes them so powerful in a reaction. But in reality, it causes another effect. So when they hit each other, they change direction. So almost at the speed of light, they crash into each other, and it's coming from every direction. It's everywhere, up, above, below, left, right, sides, up, down, it's everywhere. And it pulses like a balloon blowing up, right? That's coated with glitter or something. So it just spreads out in every direction. And it just wrecks the cells of everything with replicating cells. And it has to try to repair that whatever's been struck. But the gammas, the alphas, neutrons, and betas, where they change direction, that's known as an X-ray. And so all the insects and birds and mammals and animals in the forest and everything else, and humans, are getting whole body X-rays all the time. And as you add more and more to the environment, you have no sanctity, you have no way of escaping it. And so it starts sterilizing everything, but so it'll show up in the lower species. But it also kills bacteria and fungus in the forest. And then the forest doesn't operate anymore. The roots can't survive without the fungus and the bacteria. The ecosystem can't break down without it. On top of it, and so the ground dries out because you don't have fungus, you don't have an ecosystem. Foliage and leaves and litter and stuff like this doesn't break down like it's supposed to. And so when you get lightning strikes over the next few years, you got huge chunks of this rising up into the air would normally have been broken down. And so it creates all these constant new fires all around itself. And then with the warmer temperatures, when hurricanes and typhoons and cyclones are hitting these warmer temperatures, they're just kicked in second gear. You got all this energy instantly. And we're in a worse spot right now where we get the hottest water on the planet. I don't know if that's true though, because I've heard some terrifying numbers, I should say, recently. If Japan discharges Fukushima nuclear-contaminated wastewater, it becomes a sea of death. But that's all they've been doing for 12 years, is just releasing it. And so legitimate concerns, by the way, the International Atomic Energy Report has failed to dispel concern, and that's the right framing of that statement, by the way. The International Atomic Energy Agency report had failed to dispel concern, because that's all it was meant to do. There was zero science, and it's really shocking every time we come across the UN's lapdogs, we find them miserable examples of a human. Once Japan starts its discharge plan, it will set a precedence for the disposal of radioactive wastewater by sea, causing untold damage that could be a disaster for humanity. The ocean is literally the home of my life. After opening my eyes in the morning, I went out to the ocean and stayed there sometimes all night long. I have lived such a life, he said. Oh, well, yeah, welcome aboard. Japan's ocean discharge plan reveals selfishness and arrogance. Once the nuclear contaminated water is discharged, right, really, you really think it hasn't been discharged? You know, it's all in the buildings, Dan. It's only 2.2 grams. Disgusting parasites to be doing that after 12 years. It does show you how evil this whole system is, that they feel they can just go ahead and do stuff like that. Once the nuclear contaminated water is discharged, which never stopped for 12 years, the buildings are actually gone, the radionuclides it carries will be diffused into every corner of the sea, which is 100% true. And that's true now, unfortunately. Obviously, the disposal of nuclear contaminated water from Japan Fukushima nuclear plant bears on the marine environment and the public health of the entire world. And there's nothing says that more real than France's 16-day model of radioactive fallout. It's based on 16 days. It's a continuous plume. It never stops coming out, and eventually the whole planet is wrapped in a continuous plume. And of course, if that continues, that scale continues, there'll be nothing white left there, and that's why they stopped it at 16 days. Public health of the whole world that's the problem. Again, right, that's a very selfish and arrogant thing to say, because there's 8 million species. We come last, like in the context of we should put them before us, because without them, the future can't exist. And we're the stewards, because we can impose our will upon the species and they can't challenge us, right? And so we have an obligation, we're obligated as species on the planet to try to choose a moral high ground. We're obligated. It's our obligation, not theirs. They got no say in this. Excuse me. So Korea, Taiwan, China, and Japan, and the International Atomic Energy Agency actually evil. Right? It's easy to quantify that assertion. They're actually evil, what they're doing. It's actually, it has all the characteristics you would want to quantify evil, what they're doing. It's so evil. The only way to describe them, because it's symmetrical throughout the organization, is a death cult. You can't describe it any other way. They revel in telling you absolute lies. 1,000,000,000% propaganda. 1,000,000,000% deadly propaganda. It is by no means Japan's private matter. And Japan has used that type of assertion many times. However, the past 2 years, the Japanese side has been bent on implementing of the plan over the last 2 years. That's correct. And unilaterally pushed through it, trying to force unpredictable risk upon the international community. It fully now see what they're doing is playing catch up, because they've already done it. And they're just trying to cover all bases in hindsight, because the previous administrations that were doing it never, left themselves this administration very vulnerable. So they're trying to patch up what the last 12 years didn't. But the building's actually detonated. All 4 of them. And that's because of the meltdowns itself. But it distributed knocked the assemblies right out of the building. Right out of the fuel pool. Decades and decades of reactor cores thrown right out of the building. Ejected. And turned into projectiles in many cases. And they actually, originally for quite a few years, they were saying that Reactor 3's projectiles went into Reactor 4 and they melted down. That's why that building blew up, not because of the tsunami or losing power. So they were trying to save face with multiple station blackouts going on, which has never happened in history. This type of action never happened in history. It almost dwarfs all previous nuclear meltdowns combined. United Nations, which is the military-industrial complex, which used to be called the League of Nations before Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and their first act of kindness was to go into North Korea and drop more bombs on them than was used in World War I combined on little North Korea. They killed millions and millions and wounded tens of millions. Civilians, of course. And it burnt down literally every community and city in the entire country with napalm. There's 195 militaries is what they are. They're like NATO with 20, it's actually, I think NATO is now 30 militaries. So we lost a headline on this story. That's too bad. It's pretty convenient not to have that headline. I don't like that at all. Just hang on a second. This was an Indian. This was India. Let me see if I can bring up the story. There we go. Hopefully I can find it. Here it is. For nuclear incidents, there is adequate and sufficient insurance coverage in the country, says the minister. And which is Singh, Dr. Singh. And I said, well, what are you talking about? I can guarantee it's not. The Act also limits the liability of the nuclear operator for each nuclear incident. So, like he said that India has enacted a civil liability for nuclear damage to provide civil liabilities for nuclear damage and prompt compensation to the victims. And just you go down a little bit more, and it says the Act also limits the liability of the nuclear disease factories for each nuclear incident. Yeah, to about $1 billion or something. Long-term operation nuclear plant vital for the future of the grid, says the expert. The industry's got all these experts. They've rarely got a name. Long-term operation of nuclear plants are vital for the future of the grid. But they're just a fraction of the power in the EU. They're just a small fraction. Argument that reactors are expensive does not hold anymore, the conference heard. Oh yeah, and they show you a farm in front of a nuclear disease factory. So that story was, you had to sign in, I don't do it. But so they were having a conference saying, this is the new narrative, expensive does not hold anymore for reactors. Because you got to have it for the grid. Just keep hammering that, nail the media. Unique nuclear waste melter test, a burn at Hanford. Yeah, expert lawyers. I seen you tried to donate, Colette. I seen your commenter earlier. Was that earlier today, or was that just recent? If it was recent, I hadn't checked, right? But if it was earlier today, I would have seen it. I didn't see it. And the site was slow, eh? Wow. I hear that a lot for some reason. That site, 90 million people use that same site. So it shouldn't be slow. That would be the industry, unfortunately, I would imagine. I appreciate you trying. Unique nuclear waste melter test burn at Hanford plant, successful after shutdown last year. So they're talking about 56 million gallons are in 177 tanks. I was right before the show. Yeah, I wouldn't have had a chance to check. I wouldn't have a chance to check, right? And I can't check now because it's the wrong system. Yeah, it probably went through. It usually goes through. You've done it before, sure, so it should be fine. You already know all the ins and outs, right? Oh, it went through. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought, because I read your comment earlier that you were worried because your computer was lagging. Oh, so that's great news. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, because you know, with me, when someone says, well, it was taking long, so I just left, I'm like, damn, industry got me again. Before 56 million gallons of long-stored radioactive waste at the federal Hanford nuclear waste site in Washington state can be turned into vitrified glass before disposal beginning in 2023-24. Apparently, glass is better than lead and steel and everything combined. You got any idea how crazy that statement actually is? So they dumped 450 billion gallons directly into the soil, and that's equal to these tanks you're talking about are 300 a little over 300,000 gallons each. There's 177. So you divide 56 million by 177, you'll get the gallons in each tank. And the 450 billion gallons, you divide one of those into the 450 billion gallons, and you get 1.4 million tanks that dumped into the soil just in the 50. Hanford also has 41 miles of unlined trenches because they're worried about a chain reaction if they line the trench. And the list goes on. And that's on the Columbia River. So every time it rains and snows, hideous amounts gets pushed into the Columbia River, which feeds millions of people downriver, and also has tens of thousands of farms all the way down to the Pacific. And it's the fresh water and for laundry and showers, hot tubs and everything else for millions and millions of people downstream. Bechtel, now anybody knows Bechtel knows that's the epitome of evil, right? National crew that built and are commissioning its waste vitrification plant, it took 21 years and $17 billion that we know about. You know, it took more than that. $17 billion. They actually expect Hanford will cost at least, minimum, another $700 billion. I've seen estimates saying you're going to you would bankrupt America if you try to clean up Hanford. But it would cost trillions to clean up the 1.4 million tanks they dumped into the soil of the same stuff they got in the current tanks that they spent 21 years building. Now that plant that they built, once they turn it on, they can't go inside it ever again. They're actual Medusas. During evaluation of the Joule heater, so there's another thing you got to realize is how much energy they're going to use to get these temperatures. These things are massive, 20 by 30 feet, 16 feet high, and it has to hit serious melt temperatures. Putting it in glass is still going to be exposed to the neutron bombardments, the beta rays, the X-rays, the gamma shines, the neutron bombardment. And so it's going to break it down quicker than it will lead, but it's cheap, right? Again, it's just a fantasy because they got 1.4 million tanks into the soil. They should be taking all that money and reclaiming that stuff out of the soil before they worry about the lousy 177 tanks. The worry should be about the 1.4 million tanks that's already sitting in the soil, hemorrhaging into the Columbia River. Sizewell C-Boss reacts to Metro Reader's view on nuclear power. This is so stupid. It's hard to believe that she done what she done. The managing director of Sizewell C, Julia Poik, this is in the United Kingdom, to say why, or Scotland now actually I think, isn't it? I can't remember. To say why she thinks nuclear power needs to be part of the conversation. At one point, Reader pointed out, France invests in nuclear power and they enjoy cheap electricity. France! Cheap electricity. They're shutting reactors down again because they got no fresh water. 70% of their fresh water for the last 50 years went to the nuclear plants. And nuclear plants gets a pass in heat waves because you need energy, and then all the species in the big massive rivers that are fed by glaciers last year dried up, literally dried up. They shut half their fleet down, discovered they had serious maintenance issues from the Wigner effect, the bombardment of neutrons. But France has been paying a fortune, driving up prices in a neighboring country. And they're trying to claim, that they exported even to them. In response to Martin Alley, Rob Slater, who say nuclear power is not the answer to our energy needs, the public relations little piglet says, wildfires and high temperatures in part of Europe this month are forcing us once again to confront the alarming impact of radioactive fallout. She said after Chernobyl, they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom. Said you should have abandoned it. They done sex ratio studies on the entire Europe, for goodness sakes, after Fukushima. So they were looking at everybody was radiated. And they would show up in statistics of Down syndrome, and schizophrenia, autism. But in particular, the sex ratio study, we got more males than females because of the pollution, and you have mutations across the entire population. Which means you're talking about 1,800 diseases. Should be doing studies on liver and lung and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome within 50 miles of a nuclear plant. Cancer is basically the last one, but now cancer is everywhere. Every street, every house almost. Because of this 80 years of releases into your environment, but there's 1,800 diseases, not just cancer. Japan had 14,200 neonates and infants needed open heart surgery when they were born, out of 100,000. And what would be the catalyst to cause this kind of numbers? They all got the one thing in common. They all started happening after Fukushima. So wildfire and high temperatures is caused, you can trace this all the way back to 2011. It's been going on for 80 years straight and accelerated because of the releases, the weapons testing, the unmitigated dumping. And when you're dumping barrels into the ocean, when you get around a couple of 100 feet, they collapse. It's unconscionable. What this industry has done for 80 years is unconscionable. And the current generation has no relationship with the human experience whatsoever. No concept of what it's like to be a human. That's why we urgently need to get on and build nuclear power stations like Sizewell alongside the small modular reactors and wind farms that will help to reduce our use of fossil fuel. What a disgusting statement. You're going to have nuclear and small modular reactors and some wind farms, which, of course, got no storage. Canada scuttled the storage for renewables last year. 750 wind and solar farms got shut down last year in Ontario in nuclear land. And they had $4.5 billion from the previous administration for storage for renewables. So, well, we got no more than renewables, we just shut them all down. Let's give the $4.5 billion to Bruce Nuclear Power. What do you think they used it for? Oh, that's right, storage. It's disgusting. It's unbelievable disgusting. It's revolting. How can you have a country with nuclear in it, I wonder? Because I can't see how it works. And wind farms that will help to reduce the use. First off, all nuclear power plants need 2 independent gas, oil, and coal plants. She's despicable. She makes me sick to say stuff like that. Nuclear energy allows us to generate a lot of clean electricity from a very small footprint. Hanford's 450 billion gallons they dumped into the soil, just at one spot. Not counting all the national laboratories, not counting Russia and everybody else, the Soviet Union, but just at one site, just at one dump, 450 billion gallons, is a 518 feet wall. 518 feet wall. And it's 6 feet wide, wrapped around the entire planet. And 2 liters, when you walk past it, you get a lethal dose. They got 518 feet high wall wrapped around the entire planet, 6 feet wide, dumped into the soil there. It's absurd. And you know fucking well Los Alamos National Laboratory and the rest of them done the exact same thing. You know, China done the same thing. You know, scumbag Russia and Mayak done the same fucking thing. Nuclear energy, well, we know what we know about what they dumped for 30 years straight into the Atlantic and the Pacific. That was holy shit. How do you get that evil, really? How do you get that evil? You would do something like that way back then. They haven't, and so they got away with that. Then they just cranked it up ever since. And you can imagine whose family she comes from. Really, right? She's in that kind of position as Sizewell. You can imagine what kind of degenerate family she actually comes from. Doesn't depend on the weather. Don't forget, low carbon. Really. So Julia Pike, the Joint Managing Director, Sizewell C, literally the definition of a goblin. Rob Slater's right. We should have built more nuclear disease factories. And the reason we didn't, for years, the Green lobby objected. Now the administration is empowered. They're like, yep, build them all. France has no such compunctions and enjoys cheap green energy with little reliance on other countries. They're completely reliant on every country around them to get extra power. They almost froze to death last winter. They don't have any cheap electricity. They're almost $500 billion in the hole or something. France has no such compunctions. They even export their energy to us, which they don't. It's the other way, right? We covered it all winter. And it ain't changed because they got more reactors shutting down. And another point, I did chuckle when I read Martin Allen's comment that Sizewell C would devastate the local area of natural beauty. Presumably thousands of wind turbines, hundreds of feet high across our countryside, adds to our natural beauty. And then he put that picture in there for you. They haven't built any geothermal in the last 40 years or something in the United Kingdom for some reason. And geothermal can replace all gas, oil, and coal plants. It's really something. Geothermal's everywhere. It's under everybody's feet. It's mindlessly easy to do it. And if any universities were to dedicate a couple of professors into making it easier to drill down, quicker, the planet would be rocking and rolling. The only thing stopping it was drilling techniques, because you can only get so far down with the current techniques. But if the universities picked up some slack, Balmoral could be heated by thermal, and it's taken off already. Geothermal bubbles up to heat hungry homes. The country is now a leader in geothermal power. It's not easy, not hard, because no one's using it. Nuclear industry has ostracized it from the lexicon. Geothermal plants secures EPC contracts. Dandelion raises $70 million to bring geothermal energy to homes. Nevada toad threatened by geothermal power plant wins the endangered protection. No, Nevada didn't want anything. They collect all the toads and move them to another place if they really wanted to. Geothermal technology, smart green geothermal, because nuclear will just kill everything. Geothermal-based system potentially boosts new home construction. Big time, because you can drill it in my backyard and power everybody in the neighborhood. We barely use it. There's enough geothermal under our feet to power everything on the planet. And anything holding you back, because your timer, it's easy to get down to 1,000 degree temperatures if you just modify the techniques in the air. They're using types of lasers per se. Don't quote me on that, but they're using. They have a technique for evaporating rocks. Let's put it that way. And there's another one that's using 25,000 psi water jets to cut the rocks like zigzags, and then it has a 25,000 psi hammer to smash it up, and then the drill goes through, right? It's much faster to drill down into the hot temperatures because you're just going to circulate water now for hundreds of years. It's stupid easy. And it's prolific now. When you start looking for geothermal energy regularly, it's just massive amount of stories. And they're suppressing it because it can replace. Instead, they show you this. What would you rather have? Would you rather live next to a nuclear disease factory or see wind farms in the distance? So they won't even acknowledge there's other options. All they talk is wind and solar because they've got 40 years of demonizing it because they control the narrative on storage. And there's tons of storage solutions. There are 20 different storage solutions. This last woman of the Manhattan Project saw the deadly effect of nuclear radiation up close. I think she was 94 or something. She told a story in 2017 originally. What she used to do was study the bloods of the researchers at the Manhattan Project. And at that time, they didn't know what they were working on. She had no idea of nuclear. It was very secretive. There was endless secrecy. And let's go through some of it anyway. Recruited to the Manhattan Project straight out of college, collected blood samples from many of the Manhattan Project scientists, including the piece of shit Enrico Fermi. And years after the war, she returned to Los Alamos National Laboratory, the hideous disease factory, to study the effects of radiation on the human bodies. My assignment was to collect the blood from the scientists who were working on the atomic bombs, the Manhattan Project. And everybody was spied upon. And the spies were spied upon. And that generation of secrecy still exists today. The inbreed of those generations. In fact, I put an article up a few hours ago specifically about that, which was before I got to this story, I might add, of the secrecy, how it has corrupted our countries from the nuclear days in the 40s. And each generation would have children because they would interbreed because of the secrecy. It was safer just to date amongst yourselves than bring someone new into the fold. And so you had these generational and just thousands of people employed in spying on each other. And it still goes today for a big part, right? Their children got the next jobs down the road, then their children's got the next jobs, etc., etc. Now the current generation has no concept of what a human is. It was bred out of them to be disconnected. That's what we're seeing now with professors and academics. There's a complete disconnect. It's very secretive. The world's first nuclear power spaceship will take off by 2020. How many times have you heard that over the last decade or so? I hear that all the time, man. And Lockheed, one of the biggest weapons producers on the planet, one of the top 10 weapons producers on the planet. Their biggest product is misery and death and agony and hopelessness. Brought to you worldwide by a few companies and shareholders. So you can't hold anybody accountable, right? The company has won a contract from DARPA. Of course they did. They are DARPA, for God's sakes. The new rocket will also be used for travel between Earth and the Moon. How come you haven't gone back? We're going to, Dana, someday. In fact, they're going to put astronauts, they're going to set them up and fly them around the moon and then back to Earth and analyze everything. But are you going to land on the moon? No. Well, everybody's got a telescope. Like the whole story, you got every country in the world is capable of going to the moon, and they didn't. They sent endless rovers to Mars, endless stories on Mars. They sent satellites, drones to almost all the planets in the solar system. They're on the other side of the sun. They're on this side of the sun. They're watching everything, but they're not. They're not at the moon. It doesn't make any sense. Oh no, we're going to be going back and forth to the moon on our nuclear rocket. No one believes you. You don't even have a design into. No clean energy source is marginal in the quest for net zero. Recent advances in geothermal and nuclear, again, right? Now they're trying to conflate nuclear with renewables and with commodity-free resources like geothermal. You don't need coal, you don't need gas, you don't need oil, but a nuclear does. Nuclear got to have at least 2 large nuclear disease factor or gas, oil, and coal plants dedicated to it. They can't run on their own power. They needed to build these massive infrastructures. And they show you that picture, but when you look up that nuclear site, I see farmlands everywhere. Death at every supermarket. Scum, eh? Why are almost all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? What's up with that, dog? Senate staffer to be chief of staff at Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy. Senate staffer. He got a promotion. Yeah, go on over to nuclear. Give us a call when you get there. We want to give you lots of free money. Senate staffer Rory Stanley will become the chief of staff at the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy. That's quite the promotion. I wonder who he killed in order to get that job. Harding awarded almost $1 million from National Nuclear Security Administration. One of the big problems on the planet. Through the grant, they're going to train recruits in advanced manufacturing be sent around the U.S. to work to sites including ding, 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 Los Alamos National Laboratory, Lawrence Livermore National Disease Factory, and the Kansas City National Security Campus, who's operated, by the way, by Honeywell. And you'll see children's cartoons where they use Honeywell. That's in order to indoctrinate them into the nuclear industry in increments, see? They want them to grow up and go to work for Honeywell, get cancer, go home, take the little payout, get sick and die like a good little slave. We just did our job. Longview man among the last of the veterans who took part in nuclear testing. The government records show most Operation Dominic veterans weren't exposed to unsafe levels of radiation. Shivers believe otherwise. So the nuclear test veterans a lot of them were ordered to get up and walk into the plume. Okay, everybody put your back, get down in the trenches. And then a minute later, they blew the whistle. Everybody jumped out of the hole and ran towards ground zero. They stomped around, picking shit up. Went home, got sick, had children. Children were deformed or all kinds of diseases. Down syndrome and autism, 9 months after nuclear accidents, is some of the first studies you'll find. thousands of U.S. troops took part in Operation Dominic. The majority of them would be dead by the day, right? Cumberland, which is a nuclear wasteland in Sellafield, England, Scotland, or United Kingdom, seeks more detail on small modular reactors. Well, they talk about Rolls-Royce's small modular reactors that are almost as big as a small nuclear reactor. There's nothing small about it whatsoever. There's zero small about it. There's nothing innovative about it. These are just regular large reactors, and they're going to call them small modular reactors to access free money because they won't spend it themselves. Urge the government, the Nuclear Decommission Authority, which, what a joke that actually is, to initiate the UK's first small modular reactor with immediate effect in order to just throw money at us. A guide tour of the unacceptable, film on Fast Lane Pass. And so Fast Lane is where they keep the nuclear subs from the United Kingdom, right? I think that's in Scotland too, isn't it? And the emissions, the accidents, the what the fuck were you thinking stuff that went on there for the last 50, 60 years is shocking, really. We've covered a lot over the years, but it's only a fraction of what actually happened. An anti-nuclear weapons organization will be... You got to be an anti-nuclear power plant first. Power plants are weapons. Organization will be screening a film showcasing the history of the direct action held at Fastlane. Secure Scotland member Janet Fenton said, as the nuclear threat has increased through the conflict in Ukraine, we need to be made aware and constantly reminded that the weapons are utterly horrific and inhumane. Yeah, because it's so visual, you can see it. But a nuclear meltdowns and the fallout is infinitely worse than a nuclear weapon long term. It attacks all the species on the entire planet. 70 years too long. It's time to finally end the Korea War. Finally, somebody with common sense. 70 years too long is... The United Nations went there and wrecked it, and then got land, sea, and air embargoes for the last 70 years. They need North Korea as a boogeyman so they can occupy South Korea and Japan. And the reason they want to be there is because the big target is eventually is China. And which, if you look at Iran, they put 50 bases, Americans did, 50 military bases around Iran. And they were loaded with nuclear and biological and chemical weapons. And who knows what else, Air Force, jet fighters, you name it. 50. If Iran had 50 bases around America, imagine how America would feel. And at the same time, they're carrying out electronic warfare against the entire population, robbing their cell phones, robbing their debit cards and stuff like that, and then there's got no one to turn to in the country. On top of that, it's 70 years, millions dead, millions missing, millions in refugee camps, millions unaccounted for, all bankrolled by the U.S. taxpayers, so all the big weapons producers can make a profit for the shareholders. So you can't make a profit if you don't get rid of the weapons that you're making. So Ukraine's perfect because all of NATO countries, which are all UN, are all buying their weapons from the same place, all spending absurd monies and shipping the weapon to Ukraine. Like the money we're talking about, because it's coming from all these different countries, it's hard to comprehend. But holy shit, they've been shipping like 30,000 Stinger missiles at a time. Cluster bombs. Now they're shipping, you got United Kingdom and America shipping depleted uranium munitions. And they only mention it barely once or twice in the media, and then it's gone into the black hole of common sense. Atomic Annie, the full story of the most bonkers weapons. I don't know what to call that, the most bonkers. The most bonkers weapon in American history. Well, I guess so. And so the Atomic Annie was the mobile nuclear. So you know how you get those shoulder launched Stinger missiles. So you get 2 missiles or 3 missiles. Once you fire it, you throw it away and leave it behind. That's what these things are. They had 2 or 3 rounds, and they were considered disposable. Once they finished their rounds, they ran away and left it there. That was the theory. And so after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they went nuts on ways to deliver nuclear weapons. And by doing that, they created so much waste, they polluted the entire planet worse than any nuclear war could ever do. Because when you look at the nuclear testing on its own, that's equal to 36,000 Nagasaki bombs, plutonium bombs, 15 kilotons each. 36,000. That's a nuclear war on a whole different scale, by the way. And they call it testing. And they've done it over decades. And even when they were doing it underground, it cracks the earth open, vents it all into the environment. And not only that, the structure of water within 1,800 miles of nuclear explosions would change to what they call unstructured water. And so we're designed to consume structured water. So are trees and plants and animals and birds and everything else. And so when you're doing all these nuclear tests and you're changing the structure of water for up to 1,800 miles away, and this was only kiloton tests we're talking about. So imagine how far that reaches when you get into the megatons. So some families in Elliott Lake are heading to court to fight for cleanup of the mining waste. Well, you can't clean it up. You got to move out of there. And they used mining waste to build the communities for foundations and who knows what. And we've seen so many examples of this over the years. It gets used in absurd places, like all the sidewalks, the school playgrounds, the schools in particular, the malls in particular, the supermarkets in particular. Wherever you're going to have a lot of people to, that's where they were using it. And they knew this was just hideously wrong. And there was, Canada was really bad for it, by the way. This one is in Canada, by the way. Radioactive uranium mine waste rock found beneath their homes. They wanted them to clean it up, but you can't clean it up. Right? You got to leave there. What's more important, your life, your health, or your home? Because the difference is so important when it comes to radiation. You got no time to waste. There should be a siren there when you find the radiation, pack up and move. Turn the siren on so everybody else does too. You can't clean it up. You can't mitigate it. The home is now contaminated forever. And you can't rebuild on a nuclear... That's a nuclear wasteland we're talking about. The whole community is saturated in this stuff. And it was done on purpose. Atoms for peace. So they can study you like lab rats for the rest of your life. She explained earlier this summer, and I'm not kidding you. It's absurd. It's absurd. Every story about nuclear is the very epitome of absurdness. The families requested the commission issue orders to test the properties, mandate mining company to remove the mine's waste and place it as a licensed site. It's supposed to be at a licensed site, and they knew that. You can't clean it up. You're making a mistake if you think staying there and you're not going to get sick. You're delusional. And it's not your fault. The industry done it to you. But you're in real trouble if you're in that environment. You need to get your loved ones. Children are hundreds of times more vulnerable. Shown they have been exposed to radiation 15 times above the allowable public. There is no allowable public man-made anthropogenic dose. Like the International Atomic Energy Agency's criteria is based on natural, not man-made radiation, for goodness sakes. So they got man-made conflated with natural. So therefore, there's no harm. Ensuring Canada's nuclear regulator. I didn't know Canada had a nuclear regulator. Really? Canada got a nuclear? I know they got a bunch of scumbags, degenerate pro-nuclear creeps that are working in the nuclear industry, call themselves the regulatory agencies, but they're not a regulatory agency. We've never seen an example of them working in that capacity. Practiced in the 60s. Oh, yeah, in the 50s, in the 40s, the 70s and 80s and 90s, where mine waste rock from now closed uranium mine waste was used in the town as fill. Sadistic demon. You can't clean it up. The only solution is to get out of there so you can live a few more years. You've been poisoned the whole time you're there. This French New Wave film walked so Oppenheimer could run. I was trying to make sense of it and I gave up. They went down to Hollywood flicks and I lost interest. Because Hollywood is just fluff, right? Doggy bank and poppy cultivation, which is heroin, as a new book tells how Pakistan raised money for nuclear weapons. They're protesting in the streets of India and Pakistan because they can't eat nuclear weapons, right? And the country's burning every nickel they get their hands on in the nuclear industry. Thailand, that's a big disappointment, is playing around with fusion. Thailand's got, we talked about this before, how they started up a nuclear agency in Thailand. And I said, well, it won't be long now before they poison everything down there. They just need the right catalyst to get away with it. And so they're going to blow money on the fusion, which they've been at since 1904. In the last couple of years, all kinds of companies have showed up and they're going to conquer fusion. They all got their own design. Everybody's very secretive. They conquer jack shit. You're trying to contain 300 million degree Fahrenheit temperatures with magnets is the best they can come up with, and it doesn't work. And then the alleged ignition that they had at Los Alamos National Laboratory in November, they weren't able to replicate it. And they've tried a lot. And we'll get it one of these days. Thanks for buying all the stock in the new fusion companies, suckers. That's what they done, eh? Yeah, they're still at it. That's why they're showing you that. They're not just evil sometimes, they're evil all the times. That's one thing we learned about nuclear. Emphasized that the operation will propel Thailand's advancement in nuclear fusion application. It's the stupidest story imaginable. Unless you look at it from the nuclear industry side, it's a win-win-win-win-win. Massachusetts environmentalists need to embrace nuclear. We've heard this kind of narrative quite a bit. Like, you got to suck it up, and nuclear is the only thing that can save us. Buy some shares while you're at it, because I want to sell mine and go on vacation. If you cover the entire state of Rhode Island with solar panels, we'd only power 13% of American homes. If you covered 1% of the farmland in America with solar, you would have enough energy to run the entire country. And so I disrespect you for saying what you just said. That's very disgusting and atypical pro-nuclear scumbag. Fusion is leading the way to clean energy revolution. Like, what are you talking about, moron? They don't have a single and no hopes of one on the planet, and they admit it. But here you are plugging that and saying that they got to accept nuclear. It's disgusting, man. France sees higher risks of delays to UK's new Hinkley nuclear disease factory. Gee, I'm shocked. I'm totally shocked. I've never seen that coming. France's reactor not going to come in on time? Oh my God. Nobody's seen that coming. Nobody. Multi-billion euro cost of fuel complaints over new nuclear. Like, if you look at Hinkley Point, it's the biggest construction project on the entire planet in history. Wrap your mind around that statement. They get lucky, they get lucky. Oh, we got lucky. Nothing wrong with a bit of lucky. Hang on, here we go. Now, when you actually look at it, they got two of the world's biggest cranes on the site. They everything there has to be inspected 3 times before it gets to the site. Once it gets there, it's got to be inspected 2 more times. They need 2 gas, oil, and coal plants, maybe 3 for Hinkley, just to run everything on the site. It's bigger. They use more electricity than a city. And when you just zoom in on little sections of it, it's still massive. They got enough cement there to pave a highway or a sidewalk all the way to Rome. And everything's going to be bombarded with neutrons. So when you zoom in on it, it's shocking. You can't even focus. Like, you try looking for a car or a truck, you get lost immediately. I should do a video just on material. I'm pretty good with stuff like that. Like, the World's Trade Center had enough gyprock, glass, cement, and steel. First off, it had enough steel to build 11 container ships. You know, the container ships, it takes 5,000 containers. It had enough steel to build 11 of them. It turned to dust in less than 11 seconds. It hit the ground before. If you dropped a cannonball off the roof of it, when it collapsed, the cannonball hit the ground after the building. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. That's some type of directed energy weapon. Some seriously advanced stuff. The amount of material that they used, everything you zoom in on, it's just endless. $6 million there, $70 million there, $20 million here. Everywhere you look, you can just excrete the money. It's shocking how big it actually is. And look in the background, as far as you can see, farms. It screams, I hate your guts. Just screaming it at you. Look at all the farms in the background. Some scary shit, isn't it? And then the ocean on one side, farms on the other, 3 sides. Japan opens Pandora's box with the radioactive water plant. Oh, Pandora, bamble down, Pandora had a child. Bamble down, damn things gone wild. Oh, Pandora. We got 40 votes and 40 likes. What the hell is that all about? When the hell do you ever see that ratio? What's up? Nuclear industry. Like, South Korea, Taiwan, China, and Japan, and the International Atomic Energy, orchestrated by the International Atomic Energy Agency, are going to hoodwink all the Asian countries from here on out with 2.2 grams and will attack any descending voices. But there won't really be any descending voices because Taiwan, South Korea, and China could have easily come out and said, wait, you contaminated the entire planet. It's that easy for them. They have the media. All they got to come out is mock Seth Dorn, Cecilia
Prime
Vega,
standing is on top.
Rupert Winfield Hayes, Anna Curran, and all the other media that pretended they were in Reactor 4. It's all they got to do, make that global, and that's the end of the nuclear industry. Bye-bye nuclear. It's that simple. That's why I created that video. I was like, how can anybody not get that? How can anybody not understand the level of illness you got to have to participate in that kind of a lie? And imagine the coordination, because you can't have a descending voice for it to work. So instead of talking the talk, why not walk the walk? So you show these pictures, but you don't show the
Prime
pictures.
standing is on top of what.
And I really, really, really like to know why. Hunter film Radioactive tells an important story. We covered this quite a bit over the last number of months. This was a film based on 3 Mile Island from mother's perspective. It was really something. And so 3 Mile Island experienced a meltdown, the most serious accident in the history of the American commercial nuclear power generating industry. So they refused to mention, and how heartless you got to be not to mention Santa Susana, which released 460 times more radiation than the brutal 3 Mile Island. And so how could they not know about Santa Susana? Well, they could possibly not know. I find it's very suspect they don't know. And because the way it's framed on top of that, the history of the American commercial, because Santa Susana wasn't a commercial reactor. That doesn't matter. It still released 460 times more radiation. And, Rocketdyne had that site and done tens of thousands of serious chemical rockets that failed and blew up. And they had massive releases. And when you have forest fires anywhere within 1,000 miles of that, there's huge emissions. 500,000 people built their homes within 10 miles of Santa Susana because they kept the meltdown secret. But it's been out since about the last 2 decades. Because that happened in 1959, right? In the history of the American commercial nuclear power generating industry. So when we see that kind of framing of the narrative, that's why they done it that way. So if someone says, hey, what about Santa Susana? Oh, well, that wasn't a commercial reactor. But the average person doesn't conceive. It's 460. It's like 460 3 Mile Islands melting down. And some of the media come out and claimed it was like watching color television for an extra year. And that, 2 million people got a dose of radiation, but it was equal to watching color television for an extra year. It's a revolting industry, no matter how you look at it. But the current generation is batshit crazy, mass murdering lunatics, in unbelievable denial of how evil they actually are. After being invited to attend a yearly vigil at the plant with a group of concerned mothers and community members, Stony Brook University professor, associate professor of English, the 3 women of 3 Mile Island, they still tell some pretty good horror stories. 28 hours after the accident, a Pennsylvania lieutenant governor, what the hell was his name? Thomas, I can't remember. He was only a governor for like 90 days or something, and he didn't want to evacuate anybody because he didn't want to cause a panic. And 3 Mile Island, by the way, is the reason you have up to 140 sirens around nuclear power plants in America. 28 hours after the accident, the Pennsylvania lieutenant governor reported to Metropolitan Edison, the owner of the plant, assured the state that everything is under control, and that later in the same day the statement was changed, schools were closed, and residents were urged to shelter in place. This is the worst case scenario. You can't escape it. And so, not acting because he didn't want to cause a panic, because we've covered this a lot, the governor, on the advice of the non-regulatory commission chairman, advised evacuation of pregnant women, preschool-aged children within 5 miles of the facility 2.5 days after the meltdown started. And so it's way too late. But because a lot of people were transients, working here and working there, and he never tried to do. Now he did do follow-up studies years later, and we have plume models of the cancers and deaths. It's now hypothesized that the impact to the immediate neighborhood was like being exposed to 50 to 100,000 X-rays. Well, first off, you're breathing it in. You're drinking it. You're consuming it. It's sequestering in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. It's mutating the children's stem cells. It's because there's a big difference. And so when you're talking about X-rays, you're talking about external doses. The plumes settled over the town, but circulating the air throughout their homes during the initial 24-hour period. But equating it at X-rays is not how that's not how you do radioactive fallout. It's in atomic decays per second. What was the becquerels, the atomic decays per second, per square meter, per liter of rainfall or drinking water? That's the ones you should have there. That's the most important numbers because it's sustained. While they sought to find answers to questions surrounding the resulting health hazards for the community, they were told to go home and bake cookies. These are not wild activists. These are mothers that had their eyes open. They were audited, they were followed, they had their phones tapped. The government immediately went to war against anybody who tried to scrutinize them. And very, very unethical and unconscionable, but this is what they've been doing, their whole legacy, still doing today, is there's such a secretive, anal type community of death cults that everything is perceived as something that should be studied. Anybody that, asks a question, they want to know everything about it. They want a big folder on them. They want it in all kinds of different places. And then they're considered subversive. But they had to because the government wasn't protecting the communities or telling the truth, and someone had to protect the children. The only way you can protect the children is get out of Dodge. You can't stay there after a meltdown. Well, you had a meltdown. Yeah, it was terrible. What'd you do? Well, we cleaned up the house, mowed the lawn. What are you going to do? See, you only need the single exposure to fuck up your life. To stay there and live in a nuclear wasteland. You're the perfect victim, basically. They were audited, followed, and had their phones tapped. Jesus, that don't sound familiar. Locals were told they could not see, feel, or smell radiation, yet many reported a metallic taste in their mouth. Yeah, they had a big die-off dogs and everything else. The radiation standards in the U.S. from the onset of nuclear technology in 1942, based on 25 to 30-year-old Caucasian male known as the reference man. However, research finding indicated the radiation is 10 times more harmful to young females and 50% more harmful to a comparable female than it is to the reference man, who's the more resistant to radioactivity. Well, no one's resistant, but, obviously a healthy person, adult can fear out the radiation more than a child can, or a baby animal can, or bird, or an insect. So in the documentary, from family members, women, and community members all suffered from cancers. There's 1,800 diseases, by the way, including information reported from a local veterinarian who was shocked to see so many stillbirths and sheep, goats, pigs, and cancer among the goats and the dogs And prior to the meltdown, he'd never seen such illness and health problems in the local animals. That's an incredible statement, by the way. We're almost through. Look at that. Wow. Some pictures from the day and video to explain things out. I guess that is it, actually. Let me double check this. Yeah, that was it. Jacob lands a contract for nuclear robots. And they show you this old picture of Sellafield or Windscale. It used to be Windscale, right? Now it's Sellafield. So I went out this morning and I ordered in a new shaft and the what do you call it? I can't remember what you call it now. The V joint, which is that one there. I'm on a big screen. A little video will play in a minute. I'll give you more context. So anyway, you see the tires are sitting right on the edge of this. We're on a downward slope, by the way. Once I let the shaft go, the bloody thing rolled ahead. Lucky for me, it stopped on the little bumps on the ramps. But anyway, this stuff is expensive. I'll have it on Wednesday, guaranteed delivery. It'll be here by Wednesday. I put tape on it in case I change my mind. I had to let go of that end. To see if that was destroyed, because I got talking to the shops and everything, I got conflicting reports. But I knew it had to be the shaft for sure. It was worse than I thought. I don't know how I made it this far, and you'll see that in the video in a second. Coming right up right now, I guess. And so, truck is down right now until Wednesday. But after that, it'll be 100% again. And we are going to go hard starting this week. Look at that. Wow.
So that's completely let go.
It's stripped too, eh?
That's why.
And so is that piece. The U-joint is stripped. Thank goodness we got it off
And
anyway.
that cap, I don't know what I just done with that. It should be right here.
Good old brake cleaner. Don't touch
Here
anything
somewhere.
with brake cleaner, man.
Let's lift it up there. Yeah, that's up there. That's the cap.
She's in good shape. It's just towing around the boat, the big
replace that
trailer, and all the
shit.
equipment. I tore the shit out of it. It's actually got a buckle in it. You can't see it in this shot, unfortunately. But it's actually got a buckle in it. You can't put it back in. And I got a new one ordered. That'll be here on Wednesday, so I'm not worried about it. We got the boat. The boat was a ground wire. And the only reason I figured that out was because I went back out and tried to move the motor. And then from random reason, I turned the key and there was no power. I was like, what? There's no power? Maybe there's hope after all. And in fact, I knew I should have fixed when I done the power line, because we'd done a video with that in it, right? But I didn't do the ground wire. That came back and haunted me. Now I got almost all the pieces showed up in the last few days, except for the drive shaft and with the V joint, and because we're gonna have to replace it anyway, right? I don't think you can fix the bend in it. As far as I know, you can't anyway. And that's gonna be totally different when you put a new shaft in that, because now it's perfect, right? And it's back to brand new to the same standards. And so that's good. We got that resolved. The boat seems to be, when it was working the last couple of times, was working good. and our alarms were going off just a couple times, but then they went away right away each time. And so I'm because we changed the filter, right? So hopefully that. And let me see what else. James Lucy donated 200 last night, by the way. Thank you, James. My goodness. And Colette said she donated, so that's a big bump. And I got almost all I got to rewire the boat anyway, right? And I got most of the wires showed up, except for the power wire, the new power wire. I had 50 feet of it ordered, because you got to run on a wire back to the kicker too, because right now I'm using booster cables to make up for not having power to the kicker. So the kicker is electric, right? And you need that to start up because you're on the Atlantic Ocean. We got a 4% survival rate down here. And I'm literally losing my mind in the last week and a half or something because we can't get the kinks out of the system. So now we got that resolved by Wednesday, and not a minute too soon. So the birds still haven't got feathers on them, the fledglings, the chicks, they still don't got feathers. So we've had a serious heat wave down here this week, and it'll be interesting to see if that 4% survived. And we know they're cannibalizing them because we got that live on video. Let's close the poll down, I guess. Let's come up with some music, maybe. That's the show. Is South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, the International Atomic Energy Agency evil by claiming only 2.2 grams got out of Fukushima's meltdowns? Because what they're doing is evil. It meets evil. Like, let me just revisit a couple of those pictures before we give it up. Like, claiming nothing got out of these buildings, I can't rationalize that. That is evil on a whole different level. And they're intent on manipulating everybody in Asia. Yeah, I never put the parking brake on. I got chocks, too, for the tires. It's just, I had so much going on. We got some issues with the bike that I got to get resolved, and the list goes on. And I was just overwhelmed, and it was all this heat. I forgot to chock the tires. But I did have the brake, the emergency brake on. I didn't have it down far enough. And last year in the fall, I had changed one of the brake shoes in the rear, but I didn't change the other side and forgot to do it. And then we had snow. And I had heart attacks that winter, right? But I didn't change, so as soon as it comes off the ramps next week, first thing I'm doing is changing the other side, the passenger side, rear brake shoe. I still got it sitting there, but you know how hard they are to change? They're a friggin' nightmare. Each side is like an hour and a half, 2 hours to pull off. Because you got to get all those little chummies in just the perfect spot. And they're really, I got all kinds of pliers, but they're really hard to do. And so I'm pretty happy tonight because we got the boat working, we got the last parts of the trucks coming. I got lots of parts there to work on the boat, so I got lots of wiring to do. The lights for the boat showed up. They were cheap $10, $15 lights, but we needed them, right? Gotta have running lights. And so we'll be expanding our territory starting next week. So lots of new fresh territory. Yeah, good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Dana and Asana, thank you again. And everybody else, of course. And we'll do a shout out on Sunday's show. It's after 12 midnight. It's been an unbelievable long day. We still got a full show in. It was a mad day today. And so I'm going to take tomorrow off. Well, I'm going to play with the boat if the weather... I'm going to play with the boat. We got all kinds of electronics to do on the boat. I'm going to do that, hopefully, for a few days. We got hours and hours and hours of work to get done. I think I got every single piece I need. But you needed a heat gun, you needed the shrink wrap, you needed the solder ones where you can just stick the wires in. I also got the levers where you can just stick your wires in there, lift the levers up and let the levers go, and you got power instead of having to solder everything. They're really small, right? They're about one third or 1/5 the size of your pinky, but they're perfect for splicing wires together that you might want to take apart later, right? And all the other little stuff we needed. We got all the filters for the bikes. Oil. We got oil filters, air filters for the bikes. We got to get out camping at some point. I can't go out in these heat waves, obviously, right? But okay, have a great night, great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody on Sunday unless there's something major happens. If you make it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. We'll see everybody on Sunday. Have a great night, a great weekend. Take care, folks. We'll see everybody on Sunday. Give us a thumbs up if you make it this far. Have a great night. We'll see everybody soon.